Oh, hey, Niigaan, listen, I have a horrible confession to make.
Oh, no. What is it?
Listen, I've been thinking about this a lot, but I've got to face the truth. I have been mispronouncing your name in the podcast.
What do you mean?
Well, I've been saying Niigaan, but it's really pronounced Niigaan. Like as in gone, baby, gone.
It's not a big deal. I mean, both work just fine. It's no big deal.
No, I won't accept your attempt at easing my humiliation and shame.
Okay, well, listen. I could do the same. And how about this? I'll mispronounce your name. How about Danelet?
Whoa, wait just a minute here. I don't think we need
No, this is perfect. I can call you Dane from now on, and it'll be part of our shtick. Hey, Dane. How you doing, Dane?
No, Ren, let's not go there, please.
I can even call you the Great Dane. It's time for Niigaan and the Great Dane podcast. What do you think?
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Niigaan Sinclair and Dan the Lone Ranger Lett.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Niigaan.
Hey there.
Niigaan. I can't even remember what it is now.
Oh, you'll get it one of these days. It is another language after all.
Yeah, it is. It is another language. How you doing?
Good. Been an exciting week.
Yeah, well, so tell me all the different ways your life has changed since you've become a famous podcaster.
Well, people have started identifying me in the streets, chanting my name. I had people show up at my house with a horse. I had people, I was at the mall and people just started making a circle around me, started clapping in unison. Nothing has happened this week.
Okay.
I'm afraid that it wasn't the huge splash that we had hoped.
Well, I had some interesting reactions. The first thing I should say is to those people who took the time to listen to the first episode, thank God.
And you know what? It actually did pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, 2,000 downloads, and which is...
I wasn't going to do the number because, there's somebody out there with a real podcast who's going to be going, 2,000.
Well, for a first with very little fanfare other than us just tweeting it out a whole bunch and the paper pushing it out. I mean, we are regional, but I think it's pretty big, and I think our reach has gotten pretty big, and it's only up from here.
Yeah, no, I thought it was interesting. I got a pretty good reaction from readers. I got quite a few emails from readers. Most were supportive. One guy whose name I'm not going to mention told me that that the name of the podcast was frickin' racist. I'm not actually softening the word. He didn't use the real F sharp. He said frickin' racist.
And that's the last time that my dad will be emailing me.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you know what? It's a fun name, and I think it's intended to create reaction, and I hope that people think of it. I got an email from someone in Europe who listened to it, and she was someone who I knew way back when I was a teenager. Hadn't heard from her in forever, but saw it on my social media, listened to it, and said it was nice to hear my voice, but also nice to catch up on what's happening, on this side of the pond.
Well, it obviously speaks to the power of the medium, right? We're limitless now. But I do want to pass on one shout out to a reader named Lydia Heshka. And she didn't share with me her husband's name, but she did share that they're both 80 years old. And anyways, not only did she send me a Lone Ranger joke, which I won't really go into, but she sent me a link to a video and a whole bunch of history about Glen Campbell, famous country and western singer-songwriter and amazing guitar player, and sent me a link to a YouTube video of Glen Campbell playing the William Tell Overture with an orchestra. And honestly, it is one of the most impressive bits of guitar work that I have ever seen in my life. And so, Lydia, hey, respect for sending that out. And I hope you're listening to the second episode so you can hear the shout out. But now, this was supposed to be a podcast about politics. So what's caught your eye recently? Political stories.
You know, I think there's three things really worth talking about since we last talked. And, you know, I want to talk a little bit about, you know, last week was released later in the week, but important nonetheless, is the Liberal economic statement, which does, I think, three really interesting things. There's lots of the good stuff in there. You know, these sort of, we are in a minority government. The NDP is a big part of the Liberal supply agreement. And so you're going to see a lot of things that are NDP friendly in this statement. So you see a lot of forgiveness of student loans. You see a lot of commitment to issues around immigration. But the two things that I think were really important to note is that on top of the fact that it's dire, it's talking about a recession coming, it gives a kind of support to truckers that was unexpected. It gave a number of areas of thinking about $26.3 million over 5 years towards issues around compliance within the trucking industry. And I think that's kind of a tip of the hat to the ways in which the Liberals are trying to reach across the aisle. And then there's the other areas around consultation for cryptocurrency, which has really opened up a whole Pandora's box around the issue. And then, of course, the last thing that people are always talking about is around infrastructure. And that's the way governments spend their way out of inflationary crises, is around trying to create jobs and money into the economy, but at the same time, not too much, because you don't want to continue to have the Bank of Canada raise the interest rate.
Yeah, you know, the inflation and its connection to governments and government budget deficits it's going to be a fascinating story from now through budget season early next year and into the spring. So I think most people understand when things cost more money, there's more sales tax generated from things. And along with inflation, you get, a corresponding rise in wages, which means income tax is riding high as well. So, really, and I've had quiet conversations with, people that are connected to various levels of government and finance departments. And they're like public facing, oh, inflation. Oh my God, inflation's so horrible. Cost of living. And then behind the scenes, they're like, oh my God, we're rolling in it. Like governments are making so much money right now. Own source revenues are going crazy. And, there isn't really anything government can do to curb inflation other than central bank policy and interest rates. And that hasn't worked very well so far. But, it's important to understand, I suppose it is a positive outcome is that it restores balance to government treasury. And, I wouldn't say that makes the concerns they have insincere, but, they can see both sides of the equation.
And there's such an issue around the labor force right now, shortage of labor, but then this kind of gap that I guess we just have to ride our wave through where small businesses and organizations, there's a big announcement this week in the city where the Lions Club is selling their humongous seniors complex, and it will likely be purchased by private owners. And that's a story that I'm working on right now. Because it'll impact hundreds and hundreds of low-income seniors that will be faced with radical increase in their cost of living or go out on the streets. And I think we've got a crisis on our hands. And a lot of this has created, things trying to balance itself coming out of the pandemic.
Didn't you think the references in Chrystia Freeland's economic statement to cryptocurrency and truckers was also, kind of a not so subtle middle finger to Pierre Poilievre. He was talking about cryptocurrency for reasons that still escape me during the leadership campaign. But he is kind of, truckers and cryptocurrency. I could almost hear, if you listened really carefully, you could hear the sound of hands slapping foreheads in the Conservative Party headquarters in Ottawa, because the Liberals don't really have to deliver on any of those things. But if they're talking points for the Liberals now, then it takes some emphasis out of what Pierre Poilievre is saying. Although, pivot, He's not really saying much of anything to anybody, is he?
I think one of the most interesting things happened this week where in one of those rare moments, I mean, it's well known, and all of my friends in Ottawa complain about this all the time. In fact, this is sort of on Power and Politics, this is the kind of ongoing joke in the newsroom, that Pierre Poilievre never gives interviews, and he never speaks to the Ottawa press gallery. And this is tantamount to performing murder in Ottawa. Like this is like the most egregious thing you could possibly do, is not talk to reporters in the center and locus of Canada's government. And here he is, refusing to do stand-ups, refusing to do press conferences. But then he gave a press conference in Vancouver. Typical just inflation tags. He did it in a supermarket, I think. Where he was, his famous thing is he was always talking about the cost of breakfast and the cost of the goods and peanut butter and so on. And so,
is there a Pallister kitchen table in there somewhere?
and this reporter, I think it was a CPAC reporter, turned to him, or it was actually, I think maybe even CBC Vancouver, I'm not sure, but they turned to him and said, why don't you give interviews? Like, why is it that you don't want to give interviews? And he sharply said, "Oh, I'm giving an interview right now." And then he said, but they said, well, why don't you give interviews in Ottawa? And he said, well, I don't speak to the Ottawa media. Canada's bigger than that. And then he said something really interesting, and I want to make a quasi challenge. I want to, call out Pierre Poilievre on this one. He said, I speak to the multicultural media. And I sat back and I went, well, who is that? And who are we talking about there? Because as a member of the multicultural media, I like to think of myself.
Fair play.
I don't know anyone in amongst us when we go to the multicultural meetings. This doesn't often come up that Pierre Poilievre is
in the National Conference of Multicultural Journalists.
And so I'd like to see, where is he speaking to these multicultural media folks, and would he be willing to speak to me? And right here at the podcast, right down the street, in a supermarket of his choosing, wherever he'd like to. I would be very happy to give an interview or ask for an interview, because I think that, as the member of the opposition, you have an obligation to not just speak in the House of Commons and give a bunch of memes and catchy phrases, but, every day you should be speaking on what it is that you're planning to do or what is it they're thinking to do. And then you have a lot of things to answer to as well, like around the support of the convoy, for example, when we've got the hearings in Ottawa still taking place and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a column just recently. It will be out before the podcast drops, but basically about the Progressive Conservative Party of Manitoba, the party and the PC government, and how they strangle communications and engagement with the media. And it's basically what I've tried to do is show how their inability to provide a simple explanation to a fairly simple story ends up providing 2 days of negative reporting on the party. And in this particular instance, it was they decided to cancel a fundraising dinner and for November 18th. And when Canadian Press inquired, they said, yeah, there's scheduling conflicts, nothing to see here, move on. Well, I mean, that's the worst thing you can say to a journalist, right? So we ran the story. A lot of people ran the story. There's political scientists quoted in the story saying, oh, I don't know, this could be the tip of a bigger iceberg. I mean, they can't organize a 2-car parade, blah, blah, blah. And, in the end, it was with the new leader coming in late last year, Heather Stephenson, there was a transition period at the PC party headquarters, and the people who were planning events for 2022 did not look at the calendar. November 18th is the gala dinner and AGM for the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association. And if you're a Manitoba PC, you're going to be at that gala because that's big networking. Manitoba Trucking Association has a big gala that night. And then the big one, which is, and I always tell people, there's certain things you should never try to compete with. So don't hold a fundraising meeting within 48 hours of the Grey Cup.
Yeah. I mean, big.
Because you're a big fan. You've been to Grey Cups. You're a big fan. So the game's on Sunday. When do you go? When do you leave for the game?
Usually Friday.
Or earlier. Even.
Yeah. Thursday, Wednesday. I mean, this year Friday because I have a funeral, but basically I would have left probably Thursday.
Yeah, so that would have been Heather Stephenson and 150 non-football fans having dinner on the Friday night. So anyways, it's not like a huge story. There is an actual viable explanation, but by not giving the explanation, and this is to the current Conservative Party leader's approach, the less you say, the more trouble you get. That's, I mean, obviously we're, not objective about that. So Gauntlet's dropped. Okay. And I'm going to take that clip of you challenging the Conservative leader to an interview. I'm going to send it to his Flack.
Oh, I'm sure
tomorrow.
It will be well received.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm going to demand a response, and then I'm going to remind him that
from the representative of the multicultural
that
media.
I am not a member of the multicultural media, but I'm a good friends with someone who is.
Oh, that's sure to win you over many. The last story I wanted to talk about was just sort of like once again a reminder that people speaking up and getting involved works. Ontario, we were in the middle of taping our podcast last week. Was in this middle of a precedent-making strike where all of the education workers, these are librarians, these are educational assistants, not many teachers, but custodians. And so all those who really make the schools work, kudos to teachers, but they would be really nowhere without custodians and librarians and the administrative staff. And I'm a former teacher. I know this. They're the ones who make the schools run. And these are people who are making minimum wage. They're the ones who are often cut. Their hours are put in the worst possible times in the schedule. So the most mistreated. And there they were, shutting down the schools in Ontario for just a measly few bucks. There was these numbers thrown around of 20-30% pay increase. But really, they're only making $29,000. So really, we're talking about $2,000-$3,000, a very minimal increase when it came to their pay. And they went out on the streets, and everybody said Doug Ford was going to keep them out as long as possible. And what happened on Monday morning? Boom! He rescinded his law, the notwithstanding clause law that he introduced, which was the second time that he'd introduced it, but then one of the only times in Canadian history the provinces can enter a law that basically says human rights legislation, employment standards, federal government can't intervene.
Charter of Rights. Yeah.
It's the Charter of Rights. And so just a big reminder, I think, to everybody that when you get involved, when you take action, when you vote, when you participate, when you listen to podcasts, that it matters.
Absolutely.
That was my last.
So I'm gonna take that clip and I'm gonna mass email it to the 63% of Winnipeggers who didn't vote in the last election. How's that? I'm gonna send it out mass email. This is a leading voice in the multicultural media calling you out on.
That's right.
Okay, so feature interview this week. We're really fortunate that Mark Chipman, co-owner of the Winnipeg Jets and True North Sports and Entertainment, and also a leading voice now for an emergency level response to poverty and addictions and mental health problems in the downtown population. So we're going to listen to that interview right now, and we'll be back to talk U.S. midterms.
Mark Chipman, welcome to the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast.
Love the name of the podcast and honored to be here.
Opinions vary on the name, so we really appreciate that. So, yeah.
No, and the graphic for it, equally cool.
We're here today to talk about a few things, but, we're just real honored that you're here to talk about the recent press conference that you had with the Community Downtown Partnership. It's a coalition of businesses, government coming together to commit to the unhomed population downtown, but then also around safety, around how do we create safe spaces in the downtown area. I think we all know that Winnipeg has a serious issue around poverty. It mostly impacts Indigenous peoples. There's 100 reasons why that would be, but what do you think it is that is now that brings you out? I mean, you're not known as being a particularly public individual, so what brings you out now to deal with this in this time here now?
Well, that particular press conference was organized by the province to announce their funding for what we refer to as the DCSP, which is the second tranche of funding that they've provided. I was asked to participate in it, and I was happy to do so. We've spent a lot of time on this project over the past several years, and I won't bore you with all of the background on it, but it honestly goes back to about 2014 when we first started to, I guess, decide to try and understand, what was happening and why, and it's led me down a number of paths, and one of them, I guess, would have been the creation of the DCSP. It was almost I'm going to say a bit of a door prize for a bigger objective that we had, but really grateful that the province saw the value in it. It's not something we dreamt up. Credit for the idea of it was a gentleman by the name of Dave Dalal, who's a superintendent at the Winnipeg Police Service, who had seen this model work in Minneapolis through his contacts. So we went down there, a group of us, to take a look at it, and it seemed to make sense. The city of Minneapolis, very, very similar in size to Winnipeg, excluding all the suburbs. It's very similar, and had, a very similar set of issues. So we decided to try and tackle it, and initially it was just ourselves in the city of Winnipeg, but then shortly thereafter the province came on board, and thankfully,
just to explain to our listeners, because we got people from all across the country who listen to us, what exactly is the partnership's goal?
Well, this particular entity, its goal is to provide a service to folks who are, for the most part, suffering from some form of chronic addiction and or mental health circumstance. There is a very specific set of skills that are required to build the level of trust so that you can engage with people that are struggling in those circumstances. It's almost thought of as sort of a fourth layer of service behind the traditional police, fire, and paramedic that aren't necessarily set up to engage, right? Not that they're not capable of, but it's not sort of their the prime focus of what they do. So our folks, we have about 60 in total, 54, 55 of which are on the street in pairs, are trained in some of them are paramedically trained, so we can do some medical intervention, but they're really trained in how to engage people that have been traumatized, and or are, currently or previously are in a state of severe trauma. And it's a unique set of skills, and that's what we do. And then get those folks to the best, to the extent we can, to the resources they need, whatever those may be. Navigate for those folks to the right resources.
So I have to say, again, full disclosure, so my partner works downtown, kitty corner to the True North, or to the Arena, Bell MTS Place now. And, she was deeply affected when she read the story, and deeply affected when she read the quote that we had from you. I think we're past the point we can just look away and hope that someone is going to solve this for us and solve this for the people who are struggling the most. She works at the library, which really has become an extension of the community safety partnership, but also the whole network of social services that are offered. And that's the way the people who work there feel, is that like they're down doing library work, but they're also down doing, counseling,
frontline work,
she literally last week was helping somebody apply for social assistance using the computers at the library. obviously no one investment, no one building, no one enterprise downtown provides a solution. But how do you measure, like, what are the metrics that you're using to measure the impact of what you're trying to do here? What's reasonable? Because I think, a lot of people who don't come downtown have a certain image. How would you counter that image and tell people, can you point to progress?
Yeah, it would be a combination of really some empirical data that we committed to collecting from day one, and a lot of anecdotal evidence as well. I think one of the things I've learned that if you're looking for public investment or philanthropic investment, the extent to which you can collect data and show, demonstrate outcomes, really enhances your ability to sustain those funding. So we committed to and developed an app on day one, and so our team is out there and we record every interaction. Basically, we collect the names and the locations, and and we follow the pathway that we take these folks through. So we're able to document and show government, or whoever would like to see, what are where are we taking these folks and what are the outcomes? One of the things we do, you raised, the point that your wife helps someone get on a social assistance. That's one of the services that we provide. We have what's called our core team. They're a navigation team. So many of the people that are struggling in the city don't have ID, right? You don't have ID, you can't apply for income assistance. So that's one of the things we do, and we can demonstrate, that outcome once you get that person their ID, and then actually successfully get them the financial support they're entitled to. So it would be things like that we measure, and unfortunately, there's more. There's more heartbreak that we measure than success right now. I think it's so many folks are that our team encounters are really in a tough spot, and whether it's an untreated addiction or or undiagnosed and very severe mental illness, it's proven to be very difficult work for our folks. And the day after that press conference, just coincidentally, I was walking from where I parked my car to the office, and I witnessed this young woman who works for us manage a situation in it's kind of hard to describe, but it was really, really impactful and really moving to see how much this young woman cared about what she was doing. And I don't know what the outcome of that particular interaction was, but I had a sense that that individual trusted us and felt that they were in good hands.
Well, there's something interesting happening in the city, and it's been happening for a while now. And I think you've been involved in various different ways with the movement of community patrols, which has been happening in the city for a number of years, actually going back to the 1980s with the Bear Clan and with the Mama Bear Clan, with a group that I'm a part of. And I've been doing that for 4 to 5 years now. There's, grassroots citizens doing frontline work in what you classify or what you're talking about as kind of a fourth layer of emergency services in the city that is really on a shoestring for the most part. I mean, I don't think a lot of people also know that during the pandemic, you quietly, and perhaps you may not like that I'm going to talk about this, but that you were involved with helping open up the warming center, doing clothing drives at the games to be able to help those, even just to, because I remember giving out these all this jet gear to people downtown when we were doing Mama Bear Clan work. Why now? What do you think is happening within the city? You know, the pandemic, I think, has been very indicative of an exponential spike in trauma in the downtown. We've seen a spike in needle use, for example. Why now? What is it that's brought you to take a real frontline position for this partnership in this community patrol now?
Well, I don't know that I could say that why now, because honestly, Niigaan, like it started for me back in 2014, where, you know, working downtown, I just really started to see a change. And, you know, there was one particular recurring incident that was just happening right outside on a park bench right outside the window of my office. And same soul, you know, was, I came to understand was buying a bottle of cooking sherry every morning at the liquor store, Hargrave. And, he and a couple of his buddies would consume it, and it often resulted in a 911 call. So you got fire trucks and ambulances and police descending, and it like I said, it was recurring, and so it's impossible to sort of just, you know, disregard that. So I'm curious by nature, and I think that's what led me into trying to understand, you know, why so many people were suffering. And since that time, that, you know, there's been an exponential growth of it, regrettably. And as you said, like in your intro, like the reasons for this, the underlying causes of this are so complex, and in some ways very simple. I mean, we're talking about people who have been, you know, the victims of just inhuman treatment and the resulting trauma from that for generations. We're living with that, right? And it's, I would say this, it's not unique to our city. I was asked to go out and speak to a group in Edmonton a couple months ago, you know, about our little project and how it might work there. And I was really shocked to see the magnitude of the same, very, very same set of issues in Edmonton. I wasn't aware, and it's akin to ours. There, you know, a lot of those folks are you know, of Indigenous ethnicity. They come from communities they've been displaced from. They come to a large city looking for, you know, community and services, and they, you know, they've undergone the same trauma, frankly, I believe. And so now that's no consolation, right? Like it didn't make me feel better to come back and say, well, Edmonton's got the exact same or even bigger problem in terms of scale. It doesn't make you feel better at all. Nor does a walk down East Hastings in Vancouver. Like it's mind blowing, right?
It's actually how similar it is, and then how caring is the corrective. It's caring is the step towards a process of solution.
Right. Agreed. So it's not unique to us, but as I said, it's our community. You know, everybody who lives here deserves to be safe, deserves to be treated with dignity and have a place to put, you know, their head at night. And we got a long way to go. We got, on any given night, you got 1,500 at least, depends on which numbers you look at, but you know, you got at least 1,500 people who don't have a place with a roof over them. It's 2022, man. Like, that's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable.
So the one thing that really was sort of a shot to the gut for me reading that story was how soon that story appeared after the civic election campaign. And I promise, mostly, I'm not trying to get you to talk about any candidate or party or politician in particular. But we just went through a campaign where like the conversation about what to do about downtown is distilled into largely more police patrols, more boots on the street. I mean, and I don't think I did do a review of the top 4 or 5 candidates. No one pledged more support to the downtown community safety program. Nobody seemed to make a commitment to any similar kind of program. Elections do distill these things down into a conversation about law enforcement. So I'm just going to ask you about the tenor and tone and content of the campaign. Were you disappointed, or maybe not disappointed? Did you find anything hopeful in the campaign?
No, I don't think I was disappointed. I would say that, I spoke to a couple of candidates, prior to election day. They had expressed to me their desire to, or some understanding of what we're doing. I would say, like, Mayor Gillingham absolutely, was supportive of what we've been doing for quite some time, came out on some walks with us long before he announced his intention to run for mayor. So I think all of those candidates, whether or not they made it clear in their, in their platforms, I have to believe, I know Glenn would have taken an interest. He's got a strong passion for downtown. Scott, I just mentioned. Look, I think, man, politics is it's a tricky world, and I honestly really admire those who have the courage and the ability to do that. So I tend not to be critical, but I did come away from our presser that I think our mayor he understands these issues, the complexity of them, and I believe his heart is invested in these issues. So I'm hopeful, and I was also really pleased, honestly, that he and the premier were in the same room at the same time. I think that's something that our community has suffered from over the past however many years. So that's a good sign.
I think also there's a general misunderstanding that often puts as a binary business and social services, and as a result, people tend to think that one is not involved with the other. And talking about, in the room of having business and government, in the room talking about poverty and homelessness and addictions, mental health and trauma. These are some things that I think the Indigenous community has really sought for a long time and looking for leadership in that area. So perhaps this is also, like I've said also about Winnipeg, and has been frequently a theme in our podcast, which is that there's things that are happening in Winnipeg that I think are templates for many things in the country. Particularly because this is such a specific Indigenous issue, whether we want to name it that or not. The racism, the policies, the things that you're talking about, the inhumane treatment really have a lot to do with Canada's treatment of Indigenous peoples, the theft of the land, and so on, which has resulted in the outcomes of right now in the downtown core. You have people making small modular houses just to have people to sleep at night, and warming centers and so on. I know you've been involved in this misunderstanding for a long time. People have often misunderstood the development of the True North Square around affordable housing, which you corrected, and there is grants for people to get affordable housing. But what do you think or what do you see as the business community and the Indigenous community happening in the city? And do you see more connections taking place, like this is an example of a partnership?
Yeah, I do. I really do. I would point to, for example, and this would just be one, but the Business Council of Manitoba, let's call it the 100 largest companies in the province, many, many years ago established a program to support post-secondary education for Indigenous people. And it's really worked, right? Talk about outcomes. But beyond the outcomes, right? And the celebration that we have every year and the emotion that comes with listening to these stories of people that have benefited from, and, you know, many of which have gone back to school after years of raising their kids and so forth. Beyond that, like, I have long ago sensed a real desire, I guess, you know, amongst my closest friends in the business community to be a part of making things better, right? Not just your, you know, garden variety, charitable endeavors. I sense that amongst a lot of people. I think the frustration comes from just not knowing how, right? We want to engage, but how? And so often we rely upon government to solve these problems for us. That hasn't worked because governments come and go, right? And those who work in government come and go, and it's just, you know, cabinets get shuffled. It's tough to just place the responsibility, you know, on the steps at Broadway or City Hall or, you know, or Parliament Hill. It just so there's I think what I'm trying to say is I think people understand there's a much bigger role for, you know, it doesn't have to be just business, but the community to engage and to try and be a part of a greater good. I really believe that. But as I said, the tricky part is because people ask me, like, how, what can I do? How can I get involved? And, you know, I don't have all the answers, but sometimes I just start by saying, coach a hockey team, right? Do something like, you know,
it involves a lot of listening, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is a lot of answers in many, you know, you have Kevin Chief works for you, for example, and others who have worked for you. But when you get into those situations, I think listening is one of the things that I've always, you know, experienced a lot with your organization and the business community in Winnipeg. By listening has resulted in the very first Indigenous chair of the Chamber of Commerce, very quite aggressive business-centered programs that are designed on dealing with listening to what community organizations want to do and then really following that lead.
Yeah, another great example of that would be Sky Bridges running the Winnipeg Foundation, right? Like just another really good signal of, you know, towards, you know, working at this together as opposed to one side just trying to, you know, provide all the solutions for the other and so forth. And there's lots of examples like that. But like Niigaan, like, you know, I would say if anybody asked me, you know, on how to go about any of this, it is to listen first. It's to ask and to listen. Like we relied upon you. You know, when we had to deal with that knucklehead who wanted to wear a headdress, right? Like, it's not hard if you ask. So I've been very fortunate to be able to have people like yourself and like Kevin, you know, guide me through this over the past many years. I think if you approach this with that, you know, with that mindset of let's understand first before we start, you know, throwing solutions around.
That's what a partnership looks like, and that's actually what treaty was supposed to be about. Because certainly, you know, there's those in the Indigenous world who benefit a great deal by also listening in terms of, you know, the key right now, I think, and it is not an easy situation to be a business person in Winnipeg. I mean, coming out of the pandemic, we've got a real dire situation for many of those businesses that have been closed for 2 years. Here we are now you're running an entertainment company. The question will really be, do some of these initiatives continue in a community where you're struggling even to put on hockey games, put on concerts, What's it like to be a business person downtown? And then how important is it to stay the course and stay committed to these initiatives when it is really a losing economy at the moment?
Yeah, it is at the moment. But the one thing I think I've always been able to take some comfort in is that, we're a resilient community. Winnipeg has never enjoyed the real highs, that Alberta or Calgary and Edmonton have, but it's been as steady as she goes forever. And when we, encounter real hardship, and I tried to make this point at that press conference, like we always seem to rally and or find a way to help one another. And sometimes it takes a natural disaster like a flood or something, but I mean, that's why I think that's what we're dealing with right now. I think we got a full-blown crisis on our hands, and it merits the attention of everyone and that resolve that we have. It's another opportunity for us to show one another, that we can make things better. So there's I don't sense any quit in anybody. I'm as saddened as anybody to see a lot of the merchants in downtown who weren't able to survive the pandemic. I wish more people were back downtown working. There's still too many empty office buildings. I probably get myself in trouble if I go on in too much detail on that. But, we need people back down here that those little businesses relied upon. And, we do what we do. We can attract people down to watch hockey games and concerts. And, that's not what's going to bring the city, the downtown back, right? We need to get people back down working. And, there has been an increase of people living downtown, which is a good trend. We need more people living downtown. We need more amenities for people living downtown, like a grocery store, a real grocery store. No disrespect to Bobby Matola and that's a phenomenal operation, but, that's what we need. We got to get people back and get the vibrancy back. And the rest of this is a much bigger play, to be honest with you. Like, what we're doing at the DCSP is not the panacea for all that ails us. We need a central authority on this once and for all. Like, we have a secretariat, right, that is responsible for seniors with good reason. We need that same type of authority. I don't know exactly where it needs to reside, but if you look at the city of Houston, which is the only city that's really made any real significant change, they centralized the authority. They named it for what it was, and it was led by a woman, their mayor, who said not acceptable, pulled the social service agencies together, and they reduced homelessness by 60%. We need to do that here. We need a central authority on this. Somebody who wakes up every morning with their team, and that is all they're thinking about.
So you've now mainlined into political will. And again, I'm going to try and continue to maintain my promise not to maneuver you into a commentary about any particular politician or party, although it's killing me. So I want you to know that I'm keeping my promise, but it's hard.
We have a certain in our first episode we covered the duties the Lone Ranger must follow, and one is to act honorably
at all times and speak in perfect grammatical language. I'm also going to say, like, I don't want to be the glass half empty guy, but like what you're talking about, this central authority responding to a crisis like it's a crisis. Okay, so this is in my opinion, the great affliction of our time. Climate change is a crisis. Mm-hmm. And it's fractured. Mm-hmm. Our response is fractured. Healthcare system right now is in crisis.
Yes. And
we've got provincial and federal ministers of health snapping paper clips at each other at a meeting. I've often thought that local government is like this perfect little incubator for what you're talking about. But this is where I'm really concerned, and I'll connect the dots with a couple of things here. People not going to theater downtown, people not going to see live music, fewer people going to see hockey, fewer people reading and consuming news. 37% turnout in the civic election. And with no disrespect to Mayor Gillingham at all, but he'll be on this podcast soon, and we'll ask him this question. 9% of all registered voters elected him as mayor of the city, which is an enormous challenge, but a burden as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, we've talked mechanisms here, but where's the engagement come from? Yeah, you're doing your part, and the other people that stood up with you are doing their part. But I'm afraid I do not see at the federal, provincial, and local government, I don't see anybody saying, okay, we're going to do whatever it takes. We're going to make the resources available. We're not treating the crisis like a crisis.
I would agree with that, but I feel like that may be coming. I really do. I as I said, the fact that you got the mayor and the premier aligned on this is a positive step. Like anything, like momentum's everything, right? I feel like we've got a little bit of momentum right now, and we can't squander it. So we're going to press on the bigger fix. We just have to, because what we do. And frankly, I told the government this when they first funded us, and I can't tell you how grateful I was for that and for this new tranche. But I said, look, this is just gonna expose the gaps. We're just gonna show you where the gaps are, and this is not intended to be a criticism. There's a whole bunch of organizations doing really good work where people are really deeply committed to their cause. But there's almost this inherent, inability to work collectively. I don't know if it's because of, funding cycles get shorter and shorter, and organizations feel like they're competing with one another for funding, whether it's philanthropy or community or public money. But there's only one way out of this, and that's when everybody is aligned, right? And it's not that complicated. It really isn't. The resources to fix this really reside at the province, right? Because we're really talking. This is a health issue, to a much lesser extent, it's a justice issue, and what I mean by that is there are people, that are preying on the most vulnerable people in our community that ought not to be able to do that as easily as they are right now, right? So that angers me. And having started my life as a prosecutor, there's a part of my mind that, always drifts over there. But that's not the heart of the problem. It's a health issue. Health resides with our, it's administered by the provincial government. We have a ministry of mental health and addiction. Those resources reside inside the province. They've got to be organized, I believe, in a way that we haven't done before to tackle this with a central authority. That's what I think.
I mean, housing too. I just wanted to
housing,
add, yeah, because so much about the unhomed or the unhoused have to do with mental health. I mean, the fact that, people that look like me, people with, Indigenous peoples from communities, they're coming most oftentimes from a traumatic past, and that has to be dealt with before housing. Housing is not the solution. It is mental health, but housing is the quick second solution because that creates longevity and consistency. So absolutely, it's all provincial, isn't it? I mean, it's...
But yeah, I believe it is. I mean, there's a federal responsibility here insofar as housing is concerned, I believe. But it's not just housing. You can't, there's all kinds of failed examples where you just, you find an apartment for somebody. But if you don't provide the supports that individual needs.
The home.
Exactly. And there's some really cool examples actually that have spawned here locally. The Pollard family have, done a remarkable thing. They've got I think 45 beds, but it's not it's not just 45 beds. All of the wraparound services that those folks need are there in the building, right? And that's what it takes to succeed.
Yeah, I grew up on welfare and Manitoba housing, I know 100% that it's about the people around you, and it's about all of the different things that support you in that, the fact that you can share childcare, that you can share food, that you can share medicines when you need to. I can't tell you how crucial that is, and explains really why people choose tents over, a bed in a shelter.
You know what? Talk about an eye-opening learning experience for me personally. This time last year, Mitch Bourbonnier, who is a big part of the DCSP, uncharacteristically, he's usually so upbeat. He was really down one day, and when I asked why, he saw a real crisis coming last winter, and he's not a meteorologist. Nobody knew how bad it actually could be, but he saw it in terms of the increase in encampments and the number of people living in bus shelters. And so that's why we, mobilized the building at 190 Disraeli, which is now
a warming center.
It's
and Mitch Bourbonnier, longtime activist involved with helping set up the Bear Clan way back in the day, and just now he's working to do community partnerships downtown. Yeah,
he's a force of nature. He's unbelievable. We actually went to high school at the same time, and he's a dear friend. And but he saw it coming, so that's why we put that together. It's now known as Niigaan, which is translates into our relatives, I'm told, and we've got 125 people that call that place their permanent home right now. 125 permanent.
We serviced it last night. At Mama Bear Clan, we went and delivered sandwiches and took care. Well, we come near the end of our journey. We've ridden down the trail. And Lone Ranger, how'd we do?
First of all, I've encouraged him to lay off the Lone Ranger metaphors, but at this point, it's like eating potato chips. He just won't let it go.
We need a Jets prediction. That's what I want. That's really what people are tuning in for. The season started out great.
Yeah.
And honestly, I read today about the is it a petition or something that the team set up for themselves for accountability to each other?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like the team's all on the same page at the moment.
Yeah, I think they are. I think Rick's done a really fine job. Notwithstanding, he's only coached 2 games or 3
he had
now.
COVID for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, he got hit hard, and but he's a pro. He really is. He's one of those guys. He just, every time you talk to him, you talk about anything, you just come away feeling better about yourself. He's like a human whisperer, you could be talking about like traffic, weather, whatever, and you just feel better after you speak.
And you really have a thing for the poet head coaches, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Poet,
I do.
They have to be. There has to be a little poetic flair there to make.
There was a thing I watched last night. I don't think people know Rick Bowness has been through great teams and not so great teams. I mean, he was there during the lowest season in NHL history with the Senators, where I think they won 10 games the whole season.
Yes.
And then he's also been with Dallas, been to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have somebody who has a great deal of experience, and certainly it's shown evidence in the team. But you're not going to make a prediction? How many wins? We got you on recorded.
Well, I think I couldn't tell you the exact number of wins, but I feel like our team's good enough to be a playoff team. I really do. It was 4 out of the last 5 years. We had a bit of a stumble last year with some unexpected things happening to us, but I think we're I'll be surprised if we're not in the playoffs. And once you get in, as we've seen, you can anything can happen. We got one of the best goalies in the world, and that's where it begins, right? And we're very fortunate to have Connor.
Well, because I think we both feel the need to talk more hockey, and there are other problems in the world that we haven't even touched on. So I'm happy to announce this is the first of an 8-part series with Mark Chipman, where we're going to work through most of the world's biggest problems. We're not promising any solutions. There's no Stanley Cups being promised, but there's so much more to say, because, you're a pretty interesting guy, and we appreciate the work you're doing downtown. So thank you, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, Miguel, thanks.
My pleasure, guys.
My name's Leah Gazan, and I'm the MP for Winnipeg Centre, and this is The Storytellers. today I've been asked to tell a story about what it's like to be a woman in politics and how I handle myself in there. Well, I have to tell you, I don't think it's any secret that, we need more women elected to the House of Commons, and that predominantly, particularly in some parties, it's like a dude fest in the House of Commons. I often refer to the House of Commons as a dude fest, where you see the most grotesque, misogynistic behavior, mansplaining. In fact, sometimes I don't even know how I'm going to get out of my office without a mansplain. What would my pretty little head do? And so I tend to try and not to engage in it because, quite frankly, it's really negative and it's toxic. And I do that most of the time until recently, when I was sitting in the House of Commons and one of my colleagues, every time she would answer, you would hear a group of men from the Conservative Party en masse shushing her, like, shh. Now, the first time it happened, I questioned, what is going on? That is so violent. Now, the second time, once again, somebody asked her a question. Shh. I said, this is disgusting. This is totally disgusting. Now, recently I spoke to a colleague about heckling and how it's important not to heckle in the House because it actually eats at your own spirit. So I actually make a point of never engaging in heckling. The third time, shh. Now, by this time, I'm getting really impatient. And so I turn to my seatmate and I say, I'm starting to lose it here. Like, I can't believe this is happening. Why isn't the Speaker of the House intervening? This is so violent. Fourth time, shh. I quietly say to my seatmate next to me, if they do it once again, I'm gonna lose it. Sure enough, the fifth time, shh. And out from my gut, I scream, stop with the sexist microaggressions! The whole house went silent, not a shush to be had. I'm not proud of my behavior in the moment, but it sure felt good shutting down that sexist garbage.
So a big miigwech and thanks to Leah Gazan. I don't know if you know this, Dan, but Leah Gazan and I grew up together. Our parents were her mother and my mother. Her mother was the instructor of my mother. So we actually knew each other for almost 40 years now. So she offered to do the segment, and we're very happy that she did.
Absolutely. For people who've never had a chance to meet Leah, she's just one of those people, like when you meet, even if you talk to her in, pleasantries for 2 or 3 minutes, you feel better when you leave. Like, there's just such an energy to her.
There's nobody who embodies hope more than Leah. Like, she really believes in people, and she really believes in conversation. And her story about refusing to heckle in Parliament is just the epitome of her until that reached that point where she just had to say something. And so, a big miigwech to Leah for that. But here we are. We're in podcast 2, and we're lucky enough that we've arrived, and probably they always say every U.S. election is the most pivotal in history, but this one seems to be pretty big.
Yeah, it's amazing. In our first episode, we talked to former Manitoba Premier and former Canadian Ambassador to the United States, Gary Doer, who offered us a number of scenarios on how the midterms might turn out. And, the first thing he said is it's too close to call any of this. He did think that the Republicans were going to regain control of the House of Representatives. As we talk right now, there's nothing final, but that certainly seems to be the way the House is moving. It looks as if they're going to regain control. The Senate, once again, has come down to, like you talk about the United States as a deeply divided nation. Well, the Senate certainly embodies that. 48, with one seat in Georgia going to a runoff.
Yeah, if you see the numbers are pretty amazing, because what if you watch any of the networks, they'll tell you quickly how many have turned over, and the Senate only one seat and the entire Senate has turned over, and it's Fetterman in Pennsylvania. And
that was a gain for the Democrats.
And everybody thought that he was out of it. I mean, he performed so badly in the debate, and we talked about that with Gary Dewar. And there was a really question whether he would be fit for office. And I spent a day kind of researching John Fetterman. John, right?
Yeah.
And I only hear Fetterman all the time. That's why.
No, I know.
I went to
it's like but it's like the Simpsons. Fetterman.
I spent a day researching just his political career and the ways, how progressive he is. And then, I read this piece about how he remakes politics by the way he dresses. I mean, the guy simply refuses to wear a suit. He wears a hoodie and shorts at basically every announcement. He says he has one suit that he used for his swearing in, and that's it. And this guy is a very interesting figure in U.S. politics because he is so outside the traditional box on the Democrat and the Republican side. It's interesting that he is the lone wolf difference in this so far midterm election.
Yeah, it is a compelling story, and the made-for-TV movie has got to be coming. The lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, a state with remarkably toxic politics. Where it's a Rust Belt state. To use Gary Dewar's term, but Trump, who really Donald Trump has no affinity for Rust Belt, hardworking, roughneck type people. But the Trump politics runs deep into that. Yeah, to win, to steal a seat from the Republicans in an election, running against a Trump acolyte. It's like a tremendous story, but that actually feeds into this absolutely amazing narrative where, Joe Biden may lose the Senate. Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker are headed to a runoff election.
December 6th.
And for a Georgia Senate seat. And so that's going to knock the Libertarian candidate, whose name I deliberately did not learn. But he got 81,000 votes, and
it's going to be tough.
Bigger than the margin.
It's going to be an uphill battle for Warnock, and I mean the three biggest stories in this election was, number one was Georgia, and it's still a story that yet to be written, the final chapter. The second story is how many Trump endorsed candidates failed. And it's funny, if you watch all the coverage, and even on Fox News, which I spent time watching last night, because I like to see, I actually have trouble watching MSNBC news because. But
seriously, it's like watching. You ever watch Jordan Peele's Us? I can only watch it in 30-second.
I can only watch parts.
Jump in and watch 30 seconds
because it's just so overtly. It's so overtly biased, and so But I also would say similar things about MSNBC. It's so overtly biased at times. But the story that's really interesting. I mean, who are the ones who lost? Lauren Brobart and all of these major election denying candidates. But it's funny that if you watch on Fox as well as CNN and anyone else, people were talking about unfit candidates, or candidates that were mediocre. That's interesting. That's something that hasn't been discussed.
Yeah.
And today there was a very interesting conversation on Power and Politics I was watching around the issue of is that really a kind of statement about Trump, that the unfitness of Trump and the ability of Trump to pull down the party, which he has been seen for so long to lead. And this third story, I think, that comes out of this is another Republican story, which is the rise of DeSantis in Florida.
Yeah, and DeSantis is his own kind of crazy. I mean, I don't I think if you're, a bleeding heart liberal, and I'm waving my hand in the air right now in that I'm guilty way. So, he's kind of frightening in his own way, but it's like one frightening dude who is locked in a mortal struggle with another frightening dude. Trump and DeSantis are just completely at odds with each other. I think that that could be, well, for me, I'll add two important things. So the loonies, like the real Trump loonies, are out there are still trying to spin voter fraud stories. But so far, like without a lot of traction, like, it's almost as if it's, okay, whatever.
No, I think people generally thought this election would be en masse candidates who would refuse to accept. But generally, that hasn't happened.
And so I think that leads very carefully into the second thing, which is that, Donald Trump was supposed to do his own rally or, celebration last night about this thunderous red wave, taking back the U.S. Capitol in a less violent way. And it didn't happen, and nobody really cared what Trump had to say. But now, but that was the springboard to 2020. I'm back.
And he was supposed to have a press conference in exactly a week, 1 week from today, on the 15th, that he's announcing a presidential run.
So, the result means that he's gettable. He's beatable. If you're Ron DeSantis, if you're any
Mike Pence, I don't think Mike Pence is. He's come. It's interesting. You can always tell when they're beginning to make a run. You'll see them suddenly appear in feature interviews with Anderson Cooper or Oprah Winfrey or whatever else.
And he's out there.
And he just started this week with feature interviews of here's my platform, and I think Pence is a real uphill battle because he's so tied with Trump.
Yeah,
and he'll need to divorce himself further.
Well, I don't know. I think when Trump, not so thinly veiled, encouraged people to kill him, I think that might have provided a little glimmer of
But then
space
again,
between the two of them.
I saw a great quote that Republicans really have no reason to complain about this election because whether you supported Trump or not, you still enabled him.
Yeah,
enabling is just as bad as endorsing.
Yeah. I think maybe 6 months ago, the question was, would anybody run against Trump? I think that the question now is how many people are going to run against Trump? And, I think that his previously impenetrable hold on the leadership or, and certainly just in politically practical terms, the best possible way that the Republicans could capture the White House would have been 6 months ago, would have been Donald Trump. And I think that the midterm results show that that's not true. I think it's so I think that is DeSantis and other Republican contenders, they are now emboldened.
And, the funny thing about it is everyone's talking about who's going to run for president as if it's a fait accompli. But, Joe Biden has to be pulling at least some kind of victory from this. But, what Biden predicted was true, and what Democratic lawmakers predicted was true, was that abortion would be on the ballot. And that the number of people who came out from exit polls from those kind of questions, I've always heard about this. I've never seen it, by the way. I've never seen exit polls coming out of, or somebody standing there with a clipboard saying, what were the most important issues for you? But the exit polls all suggested universally that abortion was the second most important issue after the economy. And it's important to note that, Michigan, California, Vermont, all of these states put women's rights on the ballot. They said that a woman has a right to choose and that this would be the key issue. And this was something that I think people carried when they went. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that also people, maybe for one of the first times in my memory anyways, at a U.S. election, looked at their candidate more, at perhaps being sick and tired of the bipartisanship of American politics, because you saw these kind of interesting battles. Like I think New York is the one big example where you saw a tiny red wave in New York where, New York's a blue state, it's a Democratic state.
Yep.
And you saw representatives in various districts all throughout the states just take on Democratic incumbents and defeat them.
Yep.
And I think because not because suddenly New York's turning red, but I think that there was people actually listened to the candidates in those ridings.
Yeah, I mean, overall, and it's probably still too early to tell, but I think that, the sense that the United States was slipping into some form of anarchy that that it was possible that people that denied the 2020 election result, who wanted to manipulate the rules for voting to disenfranchise millions of Americans and frustrate their efforts to vote. To a certain extent, I think U.S. institutions push back against that and have been remarkably resilient. And like, obviously, there will be legal challenges going on for months afterwards. But I think just the fact that, like, if you look at the websites for the leading U.S. news organizations, for that segment of our podcast listening audience who thinks that we ought to be listening to, Fox News and its counterparts, it's election fraud or alleged election fraud or attempts to overturn results by alleging election fraud are not even nearly the top story. And that is so encouraging, right? Honestly, there's a few American cities I love, and I was afraid the results of the midterm meant that, there's no more Chicago in my future. There's no more Minneapolis, it's so. Anyway.
I was watching different races throughout the night, but I happened to be very close with my friend Carrie Miller, who works in my department in Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba, and we were texting throughout the night because she particularly watches Wisconsin. And this is a story you'll never hear, but I think it's an important one. There was a huge close race between Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes. People did not expect that to be close. Mandela Barnes, the Democrat, throughout the night was keeping within inches of Ron Johnson. And Wisconsin, heavy red state. In fact, so red that they've declared wars on universities, attacked institutions, public institutions, are radically into defunding and then, upping things like police and so on. And, the U.S. Senate race in Wisconsin, no one was really talking about, probably nobody will talk about, but it did come down to 1%. And Mandela Barnes, black candidate, progressive candidate, but interestingly enough, almost unilaterally won all of the Indigenous vote.
Really?
And this Indigenous vote is a small percentage. This is, it's in an election where 1% is the difference. In Wisconsin, Mandela Barnes won Indigenous communities, First Nations, they would call U.S. tribes, in Wisconsin, which are a very significant vote, 3 to 5%, won almost unilaterally that vote. And that was what kept him so close. And I think that's an interesting little feature that you won't often hear in U.S. politics, but it really shows you that in certain states like Arizona, New Mexico, Wisconsin, Michigan, in Oklahoma, of course, went thoroughly Republican. Indigenous peoples in Oklahoma, having lived there, are some of the most Republicans around, which might surprise you, but Indigenous peoples are thoroughly Republican, also very patriotic, very involved in things like war, supporting war and so on in Oklahoma. But in Wisconsin, there is a really interesting blue wave amongst Indigenous voters.
So the good news about the U.S. midterms is it's the story that keeps on giving. So because results will be in question for weeks or even months, who knows? Maybe we'll even have Gary Dura back.
Who planned that? Wasn't it supposed to be years ago when we had hand ballots and somehow hand ballots back in the day, back when I was a kid in the 80s, that hand ballots we seem to get a decision in one night. But now with the internet, with technology, with, when we did the civic election recently, I put my ballot in a machine and it was counted within seconds. It's supposed to be better, isn't it?
I don't think it's the technology that's slowing things down. I think it's the competing mobs of finger-pointing militants that...
the butterfly ballots?
Yeah.
In Arizona, the reason why Arizona is taking so long, and Arizona right now, fairly razor-thin, Trump-backed the TV anchor Aaron Kane is in second place. They check every signature. Holy smokes! Imagine that job.
No, I know, and it's it's such a farce. It is such a farce. But again, like, we're going to come back for our first podcast of the year and say, well, everybody, it's great. We finally got the results on the U.S. midterm elections.
10 years from now.
That's right.
Well, luckily, our producer, Adam, great guy from the United Kingdom, they really got it right over there. They don't even hold elections, and they just keep picking whoever they want. Whichever party wins, they don't even go back to the ballot box.
No, they just have the MPs.
You can see him shaking his head right
and
now.
And the lords get together and they tut and pick a leader. Yes, that's not better. So anyways, podcast number 2 in the can. Yay for us.
Thanks to Mom for downloading it thousands of times. Really appreciated that. Huge thanks to all of the, one thing that's been really a treat is our colleagues at the Free Press.
Yeah.
And all of our friends, former reporter Alex Paul even reached out to me, who's, no longer at the Free Press, but listens intently, loved us, tweeted us out and so on. And, all of our friends in the Free Press and also in CBC who, where I work and so on, it's just, what an honor it is to have our colleagues listen to us. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, no, for sure. Although I will say, like, they, they're journalists and they listen like really too carefully. So like in the Mark Chipman part of the interview, like I talked about my partner working in the library system downtown, and I'm trying to be kind of a hip guy, and I'm using, instead of wife, use partner. And anyways, and so I had, a former Free Presser email me right away and go, oh my God, Dan, or like, are you and Danielle split up? You didn't say wife. Yeah. And I was like, no, I was just, trying to be with it.
The mistake you, Lone Ranger, do is when you try to be hip. You got to just stay traditional, stay who you are, and we'll be just fine along the journey.
Hi-yo.
Well, podcast 2 in the can.
Okay.
We've just secured some amazing guests for the upcoming
But we're not going to tell you who they are.
We're not going to tell you who they are. But I can tell you, we just got an email just 2 hours ago from a huge national figure. And so what an exciting few podcasts we have coming up.
Wayne Gretzky.
It's not Wayne Gretzky, but right. I think we should email him.
Okay. there's actually a podcast where the guy, he interviews some really nice people, but he also tells right off the top all the people who said no. So maybe we should do that. Thanks to you. Thanks to Adam Glynn. Thanks to CJNU 93.7 FM, Nostalgia Radio, who, basically make all of this make sense. Thanks to you for listening. Hang in there with us. There are good things to come, and I'll see you next week.
Miigwech, thanks for listening.